It started with the sound of splintering wood. Daniel Bennett rushed to the back window and froze. Two contractors were ripping apart his cedar fence while a dozen neighbors stood along the sidewalk, whispering as if they were watching a live show. Standing confidently in the middle of the chaos was HOA President Margaret Collins, holding a clipboard with a satisfied smile. "Stop!" Daniel shouted as he sprinted into the backyard. "That's my property." Neither contractor stopped swinging their crowbars. Margaret slowly looked up. "You've already been notified," she said calmly. "Your fence is built on HOA property. Today we're correcting the violation." Daniel stared at her in disbelief. "I never received any final notice, and that fence has been here since I bought this house." Margaret folded her arms. "Then your previous owner broke the rules. Either way, it's coming down." One of the workers shoved another section of the fence onto a trailer. Years of work disappeared within minutes. Daniel reached for his phone and began recording. "You don't have permission to destroy my property." Margaret smirked. "I have the authority of the HOA." The neighbors exchanged nervous glances. Ryan Foster, Daniel's next-door neighbor, quietly walked over. "Daniel, I don't think this is right," Ryan whispered. "They're moving awfully fast." "So do something," Daniel replied. Ryan looked toward Margaret before lowering his voice. "Nobody wants to get on our bad side." Within 30 minutes, the fence was gone. Daniel's backyard was completely exposed. Margaret handed him an envelope. "You're also responsible for the demolition costs." Daniel looked down. $5,000. He laughed, not because it was funny, but because he couldn't believe what he was reading. "You tear down my fence and then bill me for it?" Margaret's smile never changed. "If you disagree, you're welcome to appeal." She climbed into her SUV and drove away. The contractors followed. Only silence remained. Daniel stood in the middle of his ruined yard, surrounded by broken fence posts and scattered pieces of cedar. That evening, Ryan walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I've lived here 12 years, Ryan admitted. "I've never seen Margaret move this quickly." Daniel frowned. "Why?" Ryan hesitated. "Because this isn't about a fence." Daniel looked at him. "What do you mean?" Ryan glanced around to make sure no one else was listening. 3 families had surveyors visit this neighborhood over the last few years. So, every one of them suddenly sold their homes. Daniel felt a chill. "Why?" Ryan shook his head. "I don't know. But after each survey, Margaret became nervous." That single sentence stayed in Daniel's mind all night. The next morning, he visited the county records office hoping to find the original property map. The clerk searched for nearly 20 minutes before returning with an odd expression. "That's strange." "What?" "The subdivision records are incomplete." "What does that mean?" "The original survey is missing." Daniel frowned. "Missing? It should be here." Instead, the clerk handed him a photocopy of a revised neighborhood map filed nearly 8 years after the community was built. Daniel studied it carefully. Something felt wrong. Several property lines looked unusually straight, almost as if they had been redrawn. "Can I get a copy of the original filing history?" Daniel asked. The clerk nodded. "Some of those records are archived. It'll take a few days." Daniel thanked her and left. Outside the courthouse, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone wanted those records to stay buried. Back home, he found Linda Brooks waiting near his driveway. She served on the HOA board, but rarely attended community meetings. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. Daniel crossed his arms. "Then why are you?" Linda looked over her shoulder before speaking. "Margaret never showed the board a land survey." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "What?" "She told us legal counsel had already verified everything." "You never saw proof?" Linda slowly shook her head. "None." Daniel's heartbeat quickened. "If she didn't have a survey—" Linda interrupted him. "Be careful." "Why?" "Margaret doesn't lose." Before Daniel could ask another question, Linda hurried back to her car and drove away. That evening, Daniel called Michael Grant, one of the most respected licensed land surveyors in the county. "I need an emergency survey." Michael laughed softly. "Property dispute? You could say that. I'll be there tomorrow morning." As Daniel ended the call, he looked across his empty backyard. Margaret believed the fight was over. She thought removing the fence meant removing the problem. She couldn't have been more wrong, because within 24 hours, a single set of survey markers would begin unraveling a secret that had remained hidden for almost 20 years. And once that first metal stake was driven into the ground, there would be no stopping what came next. The next morning, Daniel barely slept before hearing the rumble of a white pickup truck pulling into his driveway. The words Grantland Surveying were printed across the side. Michael Grant stepped out carrying a tripod, GPS equipment, and a thick folder of county plats. He had spent over 25 years settling property disputes, and one look at Daniel's backyard told him something wasn't right. "You said the HOA claimed your fence crossed onto community land?" Michael asked. Daniel nodded. "They tore it down yesterday morning before I could stop them." Michael scanned the empty fence line. "Did they ever show you a certified survey?" "No." Mikha's sighed. "That's never a good sign." For the next several hours, he worked in complete silence. He placed metal markers in the ground, measured every corner of the property, compared GPS coordinates, and checked the original subdivision monuments buried beneath the soil. Daniel watched anxiously from a porch. Around noon, Michael suddenly stopped walking. He stared at one of the boundary markers with a puzzled expression. "That's impossible." Daniel hurried over. "What is it?" Michael brushed dirt away from a weathered iron pin stamped with the subdivision's original identification number. "This monument hasn't moved since the neighborhood was built." "So?" Michael looked directly at Daniel. "If this marker is original, your property line isn't where the HOA says it is." Daniel felt his heart race. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your fence wasn't on HOA land." He pointed toward the empty fence line. "It was nearly 4 feet inside your own property." Daniel stood speechless. "So they demolished my fence." Without legal authority, Michael finished. Relief washed over Daniel, but quickly turned into anger. Margaret hadn't made an honest mistake. She had been completely wrong. Michael continued checking measurements until late afternoon. When he finished, he handed Daniel a preliminary survey drawing. "This will become an official certified survey once I file it." Daniel looked over the document. Every measurement confirmed the same thing. His fence had always been on his own land. So why would the HOA claim otherwise? Daniel asked. Michael hesitated. "I don't like making accusations, but I've seen cases where property maps were altered after neighborhoods were built." Daniel frowned. "You mean forged?" "I mean changed." Before Daniel could ask another question, a black SUV slowly rolled past the house. Margaret Collins was behind the wheel. She slowed just enough to see Michael's survey equipment before driving away without saying a word. Michael watched the SUV disappear. I don't think she expected to see me here. That evening, Daniel received a phone call from the county records office. "We found something." "The original subdivision file?" "Yes, but there's a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The original map doesn't match the revised version currently on record." Daniel's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "The property boundaries were changed 8 years after the neighborhood was completed." "Who approved the change?" There was a brief silence. "We can't find any approval documents." Daniel thanked the clerk and immediately drove to the county office. The clerk spread 2 maps across a large table. One was dated 20 years earlier. The second had been filed 12 years later. At first glance, they looked identical. Then Daniel noticed it. The newer map shifted several backyard property lines, including his. Nearly 4 feet. Exactly the distance Margaret claimed belonged to the HOA. "Can I have copies?" Daniel asked. "Absolutely." As he gathered the paperwork, another employee quietly approached. "You should be careful." Daniel looked up. "What do you mean?" The employee lowered his voice. "A lot of people have asked questions about these maps, and they usually stop asking." Daniel left the building with more questions than answers. Someone had changed official records. But why? That answer arrived later that night. Ryan knocked frantically on Daniel's front door. "You need to see this." Daniel followed him to Ryan's garage. Inside sat a dusty cardboard box. "My father served on the HOA board before he passed away," Ryan explained. "I found this while cleaning." Inside were old meeting minutes, financial reports, and handwritten notes dating back almost 15 years. One folder caught Daniel's attention. It was labeled Property Expansion Proposal. He opened it carefully. Inside was a memo discussing plans to widen the community's greenbelt by adjusting backyard boundaries on several homes. Daniel couldn't believe what he was reading. They wanted more HOA land. Ryan nodded, but homeowners never agreed. Another page listed several addresses. Daniel's house was first on the list. At the bottom of the document appeared a familiar signature. Margaret Collins. Daniel's hands trembled. This proved she knew. Before Ryan could respond, headlights suddenly flooded the garage. A black SUV stopped outside. Margaret. She didn't get out. She simply sat behind the wheel, staring directly at them. After nearly 30 seconds, she drove away. Neither man said a word. The message was clear. She knew they had found something. The following morning, Daniel met with attorney Sarah Mitchell. She carefully reviewed the certified survey, the county maps, and the HOA documents Ryan had discovered. When she finished, she leaned back in her chair. This isn't just a property dispute. What is it? If these documents are authentic, your HOA may have knowingly relied on inaccurate boundary records. Daniel asked the question that had been bothering him all night. Can we prove it? Sarah smiled for the first time. I think we can. She closed the file. But once we file this lawsuit, there's no going back. Daniel looked down at the photographs of his destroyed fence, the broken boards, the demolition invoice, the altered maps, the hidden proposal. Everything pointed to one person, Margaret Collins. He took a deep breath. File it. Sarah nodded. I was hoping you'd say that. 3 days later, the HOA was officially served with a lawsuit. By sunset, the entire neighborhood was talking. Some believed Daniel was wasting his money. Others quietly admitted they had questioned Margaret's decisions for years. But no one expected what happened next. Late that night, Daniel's security camera detected movement in his backyard. A hooded figure slipped through the darkness carrying a shovel. The person walked straight to the place where Michael had uncovered the original survey monument. Then they started digging. When Daniel looked at the live camera feed, his blood ran cold. The hooded stranger wasn't trying to steal anything. They were trying to make the evidence disappear. Daniel didn't hesitate. The moment he saw the hooded figure digging around the original survey monument on his security camera, he grabbed his phone and called 911. Someone's tampering with evidence on my property, he said. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights illuminated the neighborhood. The hooded figure tried to run, but slipped on the freshly dug soil. Officers quickly caught the suspect before they reached the street. When the hood came off, the crowd gasped. It wasn't a stranger. It was Kevin Morris, the maintenance supervisor hired by the HOA. Daniel stood speechless. What are you doing on my property? He demanded. Kevin lowered his head. I was told to remove the marker. Who told you? Kevin remained silent. The officers searched his truck and discovered a shovel, bolt cutters, and printed photographs of Daniel's backyard. More importantly, they found a handwritten note with one sentence highlighted. Remove the original monument before court. The note wasn't signed, but Daniel had a feeling he already knew who was behind it. The next morning, the news spread throughout the community. Neighbors who had once avoided Daniel began knocking on his door. One by one, they shared stories. Margaret had fined families without explanation. She had threatened homeowners who questioned HOA decisions. She had approved expensive projects without holding board votes. Most people stayed quiet because they believed she couldn't be challenged. Now, for the first time, they realized she could. Attorney Sarah Mitchell quickly filed an emergency motion with the court, asking the judge to preserve all HOA records and prohibit anyone from altering property documents. The request was granted the same day. Margaret looked confident as she entered the courtroom a week later. She wore an expensive navy blue suit and greeted several board members with a smile. Daniel noticed something unusual. Linda Brooks wasn't sitting beside her. Neither was Kevin Morris. The judge called the case to order. Sarah began by presenting Michael Grant's certified survey. Using aerial photographs, GPS measurements, and the original subdivision monuments, Michael explained exactly where Daniel's legal property line had always been. There is no overlap, he testified. The fence was entirely within Mr. Bennett's property. Margaret's attorney stood. Could the original monument have been moved? Michael calmly shook his head. No. Why are you so certain? Because the monument is buried in reinforced concrete installed when the subdivision was built. Moving it would require excavation equipment, and there is no evidence that ever occurred. The courtroom grew quiet. Sarah then displayed both versions of the neighborhood plat map. The differences were impossible to ignore. The revised version had shifted multiple backyard boundaries by nearly 4 feet. What authorized these changes? The judge asked. Margaret's attorney searched through several folders. We don't have that documentation. Sarah walked to the evidence table. That's because it doesn't exist. She handed the judge certified copies from the county archives showing that no amendment had ever been approved or recorded according to legal requirements. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Then came the witness no one expected, Kevin Morris. After being granted limited immunity for cooperating, he took the stand. His voice trembled. I never wanted any part of this. Sarah asked gently, why were you in Mr. Bennett's backyard? Kevin looked toward Margaret before answering. Mrs. Collins told me the original survey marker had to disappear. Margaret immediately stood. That's a lot. The judge struck the gavel. Mrs. Collins, you will remain seated. Kevin continued. She said if the marker stayed there, we'd lose the lawsuit. Sarah showed him the handwritten note recovered from his truck. Have you seen this before? Yes. Who gave it to you? Kevin closed his eyes. Margaret Collins. The courtroom fell silent. Margaret's attorney looked stunned, but Sarah wasn't finished. Linda Brooks was called as the next witness. She admitted that the HOA board had never approved the fence demolition. No certified survey was ever presented to us, Linda testified. We relied entirely on Margaret's statements. Sarah asked one final question. Did the board vote to remove Mr. Bennett's fence? Linda answered firmly. No. That single word changed everything. The judge recessed briefly before returning with his decision. The evidence clearly establishes that Mr. Bennett's fence was located on his own property. He looked directly at Margaret. The demolition was unauthorized. Daniel felt years of frustration lift from his shoulders. The judge continued. The HOA is ordered to pay the full cost of rebuilding the fence, compensate Mr. Bennett for property damage and legal expenses, and reimburse him for all improper fines related to this dispute. Then came a sentence no one expected. The court also orders that this matter be referred to the appropriate authorities for further investigation regarding the alteration of property records and potential misuse of HOA authority. Margaret's expression finally changed. For the first time, she looked afraid. Outside the courthouse, neighbors gathered around Daniel. Ryan smiled. You were right all along. Daniel looked across the street as Margaret quietly left through a side exit, surrounded by her attorneys. She didn't look back. Over the next several months, the HOA held a special election. Margaret resigned before the vote. Several longtime board members also stepped down. Linda was elected president and introduced new policies requiring open meetings, transparent voting, and independent legal reviews before any enforcement action. A few weeks later, Daniel watched workers install a brand new cedar fence. It stood in the exact same place as the original, exactly where it had legally belonged all along. Ryan walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee. You know, he said with a grin, that's probably the most expensive fence in this neighborhood. Daniel laughed. It was never about the fence. Ryan nodded. It was about proving the truth. Daniel looked across the quiet neighborhood. The fence marked more than a property line. It marked the moment fear stopped controlling an entire community. Sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to stand their ground. And sometimes, the strongest foundation isn't built with wood or concrete. It's built with the truth.
Subscribe the channel and press the bell icon for new updates.